The water of a White Oak Creek was a dark, churning brown. It was not the gentle stream that ran just west of Georgetown, Ohio, where a boy might learn to swim. It was a flooded, dangerously rain-swollen torrent, fed by days of heavy rain. The creek had become a powerful, impersonal force, transforming the familiar landscape of Hiram Ulysses Grant's childhood into something alien and threatening. On this day, the young Grant, a boy known for his quiet demeanor and almost supernatural connection with horses, was not on solid ground. He was on the water, precariously balanced on a log. He enjoyed the water, but the creek on this day was not in a state to be enjoyed. It was a thing to be survived. Suddenly, the log rolled. The boy, still years away from the name Ulysses S. Grant, was plunged into the frigid, turbulent water. The shock of the cold was immediate, a physical blow that stole his breath. The water was not clear. It was a heavy, muddy soup that obscured the sky and muffled all sound save for the roar of the flood itself. He was not swimming. He was, in an instant, a captive, dragged away by the current. His clothes, heavy with water, pulled him down, and the sheer force of the flood pulled him away from the shore, away from safety, away from the world he knew. He was a small, 7-year-old object, utterly helpless against a force of nature. On the bank, his friend Dan Ammon watched in horror. From Grant's perspective in the water, his friend was a small, frantic figure on a rapidly receding shoreline. He could see the alert actions of his chum, the desperate scramble along the muddy bank, the search for a branch, a rope, or any way to bridge the impossible distance. But the current was too fast. The boy was being pulled downstream, a small speck in a massive, surging river. This was his first remembered brush with death. A moment of profound, terrifying helplessness. This event, this sudden plunge into an overwhelming force, would become a metaphor for his entire life. Years later, in the preface to his personal memoirs, Grant would write, "Man proposes and God disposes." There are but few important events in the affairs of men brought about by their own choice. He was a man who rarely seemed to choose his destiny. He did not seek out the conflicts that would define him. Instead, he was swept up by them, plunged into a series of overwhelming currents, a war he found unjust, a greater war he was called to command, a presidency he accepted with reluctance, and a financial ruin that struck like a final, fatal flood. His genius was not in charting the course, but in his quiet, stubborn refusal to be consumed by the water. He was not a man who commanded the storm. He was the man who, time and time again, endured it. But now, in the churning water of White Oak Creek, endurance was failing. The struggle was brief, a matter of moments. The cold, the weight, the panic, it was all-consuming. The current was winning. The shore was impossibly distant, his friend a fading witness to his disappearance. The water closed over his head. The water was a place of terror. The stable was a place of sanctuary. From his earliest days, the quiet boy from Ohio had a connection to horses that defied explanation. While he was a toddler, locals would voice concern to his mother, Hannah, as they saw her young son moving calmly beneath the great, powerful animals at his father's tannery. Her reply was simple. Horses seemed to understand Ulysses. He was a horse whisperer before the term existed, a boy who, by his teens, was the one his neighbors turned to for breaking in horses nobody else could. On the back of a horse, the shy, introverted boy was transformed. In 1839, his father secured him an appointment to the United States Military Academy at West Point. He arrived as Hiram Ulysses Grant, but a clerical error by the congressman who nominated him listed his name as Ulysses S. Grant. True to his passive nature, he simply adopted the new name. His time at the academy was profoundly unremarkable. He showed a talent for mathematics and painting, but in most other areas he was a mediocre student. He graduated in 1843, ranked 21st in a class of 39 cadets. He was promoted to sergeant in his third year, a rank he found to be too much responsibility, and he confessed he was happy to be demoted back to private for his senior year. He was, by all accounts, not a natural-born soldier, but in one area he was not just proficient, he was a prodigy. In equestrian studies, the quiet cadet became a legend. His classmate, James Longstreet, a man he would one day face in battle, later described Grant's mastery in awe, stating that, in horsemanship, he was noted as the most proficient in the academy. In fact, rider and horse held together like the fabled Centaur. This skill was put on dramatic display during the graduation exercises. In the academy's riding hall, before spectators and dignitaries, the cadets were put through their paces. For the finale, the riding master, Sergeant Hirschberger, strode to the jumping bar. He lifted it high, then higher still, fixing it at a height that was higher than his head. He then turned to the class and barked, "Cadet Grant." A slender little cadet, as described by fellow student James B. Fry, dashed from the ranks. He was mounted on York, a big sorrel, a powerful, unruly horse that many in his class wouldn't dare ride. Grant showed no fear. He wheeled York, galloped to the far end of the hall, and turned. Fry described the moment. Then the two of them came thundering down toward the bar, faster, faster, then into the air and over. The crowd gasped. It was a perfect, impossible jump. Fry's observation captured the essence of Grant. It seemed as if man and beast had been welded together. That high jump record stood for 25 years. This was the core of his character. In public, he was liable to become embarrassed. On a horse, he was a master, filled with a confidence and control that was otherwise alien to him. This was his one true form of self-expression. This passion, this identity, would never leave him. It would also, decades later, get him into trouble. His approach to this mastery revealed his character. He was not a brute force rider. If people knew how much more they could get out of a horse by gentleness than by harshness, they would save a great deal of trouble, he later explained. A horse, he said, can be made to do almost anything if his master has intelligence enough to let him know what is required. It was a philosophy of gentleness and intelligence. It was the same philosophy he would one day apply to a defeated enemy, when he famously allowed Confederate officers to keep their horses at Appomattox, knowing they were farmers who needed them. He understood control, but he preferred gentleness. The Centaur of West Point was destined for the infantry, not the prestigious cavalry due to his low-class rank. His first test would come in a conflict he personally opposed. When war with Mexico broke out, Lieutenant Grant served with the 4th Infantry. He would later write in his memoirs that he regarded the war as one of the most unjust ever waged by a stronger against a weaker nation. But his duty was clear. As a quartermaster, his job was to manage supplies, but in the heat of battle, his true nature emerged. The moment came at the Battle of Monterey in 1846. The city was a maze of stone houses, and the fighting was brutal, street-to-street combat. Grant's regiment was pinned down, their cartridge boxes beginning to empty. They were running out of ammunition, and a ride back for reinforcements was a suicidal mission. The streets were scoured by Mexican fires hit with snipers on the rooftops. A volunteer was needed. Lieutenant Grant stepped forward. He didn't just ride, he performed. In a breathtaking display of the skill he had honed at West Point, Grant improvised a technique for survival. He adjusted myself on the side of my horse farthest from the enemy, he later wrote, with only one foot holding to the cantle of the saddle. At a full, fast gallop, he thundered through the streets, keeping the body of his horse between him and the sniper's bullets. It was an act of supreme, calculated bravery. His equestrian skill and his military duty welded together. He got the message through, and the ammunition was secured. This was Grant under an external threat, facing bullets and a clear objective. He was a master. But his career would soon be derailed by a different kind of challenge, an internal one. In 1854, now Captain Grant was sent to a new, isolated posting, Fort Humboldt, a fog-shrouded outpost in the wilds of California. The journey from New York had been perilous, and his wife Julia had not accompanied him. This separation was devastating. Grant was lonely, depressed, and bored. While he was isolated on the Pacific coast, his second son, Ulysses Jr., nicknamed Buck, was born, a child he would not see for months. At Fort Humboldt, Grant's great skills were useless. There were no armies to supply, no battles to fight. His commander, Brevet Lieutenant Colonel Robert C. Buchanan, was a strict man with a rigid adherence to protocol. Grant, who had little use for protocol, chafed under the boredom and the command structure. His profound unhappiness and loneliness led to a personal crisis. Buchanan reprimanded Grant for his conduct, which stemmed from his deep depression. Faced with the choice of a formal court-martial or a severe professional dispute, Grant made a devastating decision. He chose to go home. He resigned his commission, effective July 31, 1854. He returned to St. Louis, a man who had faced enemy fire without flinching, but who was defeated by an internal battle of loneliness and a systemic one of military protocol. He reunited with his family, but his career was over. He entered a period of descent to poverty, trying and failing at farming and other ventures. The man who could ride a horse through a hail of bullets could not navigate the quiet isolation of a peacetime post. His fortitude, it seemed, was not self-contained. It was anchored to his family. Without them, the current of his own melancholy pulled him under. In 1869, the man who had resigned from the Army in disgrace took office as the 18th President of the United States. His presidency oversaw a period of dramatic change, particularly for the nation's capital. Washington, D.C. was transforming. Its population had exploded, growing by 75% between 1860 and 1870. The city that was once known for its summer dust and winter mud was being modernized. Under Grant's administration, sidewalks were being paved, trees planted, more streetlights installed, and the sewer system expanded. These newly graded and paved streets, particularly the long, open avenues, created a new, modern problem: speeding. In the 1870s, furious racing by horse-drawn carriages had become a public menace. The area around 13th Street, near the Brightwood Trotting Park, was a notorious spot for speed contests. Concerned citizens complained time and again to the Metropolitan Police, as the street was dangerous for women and children. President Grant, the Centaur of West Point, was a central part of this problem. This was the untold history. The 1872 incident was not his first offense. He was a habitual speeder. As General of the Army, he had been arrested for reckless driving twice in 1866. The Daily Richmond Dispatch reported on his July 4, 1866, arrest, noting that the general took the arrest very good-humoredly and rode over to the 2nd Precinct station house and paid his fine. The officer who arrested him in 1866, St. Crown, was nicknamed Rarey Crown for his daring feats in pursuing speeding horses. The police were already cracking down, and the top general was a known offender. In 1872, the man on the 13th Street beat was Officer William H. West. His personal story was a testament to the era. West was born enslaved in Prince George's County, Maryland. In 1863, he seized his own freedom and joined the Union Army, serving in Company K, 30th United States Colored Infantry. He was a combat veteran who had fought in the Battle of the Crater. After the war, he joined the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department in 1871, becoming one of the first black police officers on the force. This set the stage for a remarkable confrontation, one that was not just policeman versus president, but Union veteran versus Union general. It was a meeting between two men who had served the same cause, one as its ultimate commander, the other as a soldier on its front lines. The mutual respect that would define their encounter was rooted in this shared history. The first encounter happened in 1872. Officer West was on patrol at 13th and M Streets NW. The community was on edge. A speeding carriage had recently struck a woman and a 6-year-old child, injuring them badly, and the driver had fled. West was on high alert. He saw a carriage approaching at a dangerous speed. He dashed into oncoming traffic and brought the carriage to a stop. When he looked at the driver, he found himself face to face with the President of the United States. According to West's detailed 1908 interview with the Evening Star, the president, who was known for his love of fast horses, was surprised. "Well, officer," Grant asked, "what do you want with me?" West, a man who had faced enemy fire, did not back down. "I want to inform you, Mr. President, that you are violating the law by speeding along this street," he said. "Your fast driving, sir, has set the example for a lot of other gentlemen." The president, his Centaur identity momentarily checked, was apologetic. He promised to hold his team down and expressed concern, asking if the woman who had been hurt was seriously injured. Given the offender's office, Officer West showed discretion. He released the president with a stern warning. The president's good intentions lasted less than 24 hours. The very next day, Officer William West was on his beat when he heard the familiar sound of thundering hooves. He looked up and saw President Grant, racing down 13th St. fast as ever. This time, it was worse. The president was in the midst of another race with his friends. A train of high-speed carriages thundering through the Capitol. West hailed the president, shouting for him to stop. Grant's team of fast steppers was moving with such momentum that he had some difficulty in halting them. He couldn't pull over until he had turned onto M Street and was almost at 14th, a full block away. Officer West approached the carriage. President Grant, according to West's recollection, looked like a schoolboy who had been caught in a guilty act by his teacher. The president, perhaps hoping to defuse the situation, spoke first. "Do you think, officer, that I was violating the speed laws?" West was not amused. "I certainly do, Mr. President," he replied firmly. He then delivered one of the most remarkable and respectful articulations of the rule of law in American history. "I cautioned you yesterday, Mr. President, about fast driving, and you said, sir, that it would not occur again," West stated. "I am very sorry, Mr. President, to have to do it, for you are the chief of the nation, and I am nothing but a policeman. But duty is duty, sir, and I will have to place you under arrest." Grant, the man who had demanded unconditional surrender, offered his own. He offered a sheepish defense. "Hang it, officer," he said, "these animals of mine are thoroughbreds, and there is no holding them." It was a fitting excuse. The man who was a fabled centaur had a thoroughbred passion for speed that it seemed even he could not hold. He was, in this one area, ungovernable. He willingly consented to the arrest. In an astonishing, untold detail of the incident, at the request of the president, Officer West got into the executive's carriage, sat beside him. The arresting officer and the President of the United States rode together to the police station. During the ride, Grant chatted with West, asking the veteran about his wartime experiences. At the station, President Grant was formally processed. He posted a $20 collateral, or bond. But the story was not over. West, in his duty, did not just arrest the president. He arrested the 6 other drivers who had been racing with Grant. The aftermath is the most important part of this untold history. The next day in court, President Grant did not appear, choosing to forfeit his $20. His 6 wealthy friends, however, did appear. They objected to their arrests and tried to use their influence, but after the judge heard testimony from the community, he gave them heavy fines and a scathing rebuke. When these men appealed, they put pressure on the police department, threatening Officer West's career for his audacity. Here, Grant's character showed itself. The president, the most powerful man in the nation, intervened. He did not use his power to quash the ticket or punish the officer. He used it to protect him. Grant worked to ensure that West will not be punished. He reassured West he would not face any repercussions, and commended the officer for doing his job fearlessly. Grant, who was using the full power of the federal government to prosecute the Ku Klux Klan, used his personal power in this small instance to validate the authority of a black veteran who was simply and bravely doing his duty. The two men, a president and a policeman, reportedly became friends, meeting frequently afterward to talk about the one thing they both understood: horses. The current of White Oak Creek closed over his head. The dangerously rain-swollen water was pulling him under, a small boy dragged away by the current. But the boy on the bank, his friend Dan Ammon, did not give up. Scrambling, desperate, he managed to get to his friend, pulling him from the flood. His alert actions saved the future general from his first brush with death. This was the beginning of a lifelong bond. The boy, Dan Ammon, grew up to become an admiral in the U.S. Navy. The boy he saved, Ulysses S. Grant, grew up to be a general and president. Years later, Grant had a beloved warhorse, Cincinnati, a thoroughbred of immense power and spirit. Grant rode Cincinnati during the final campaign, and he was the horse Grant was astride when he met Robert E. Lee at Appomattox. The horse was so cherished that only two other people were ever allowed to ride him: President Abraham Lincoln and Grant's boyhood friend Admiral Daniel Ammon. When Cincinnati was old and ready for retirement, Grant sent his beloved companion to live out his days on the farm of the same man who, decades earlier, had pulled him from that flooded Ohio creek. The person he trusted with his own life as a boy was the same one he trusted with the life of his most faithful companion as an old man. This loyalty to his past defined Grant, but his presidency looked to the future. In the same year as his speeding arrest, 1872, Grant performed an act of monumental and quiet importance. On March 1, 1872, he signed the Yellowstone National Park Protection Act. This was a revolutionary idea. For the first time, it departed from the established policy of transferring public lands to private ownership. Based on harrowing reports and, crucially, stunning photographs and vivid paintings from expeditions, Congress was moved to protect the land. Grant signed the bill that dedicated and set apart as a public park or pleasuring ground for the benefit and enjoyment of the people the headwaters of the Yellowstone River. With his signature, the world's first national park was born, a legacy of conservation that was a true anomaly for its time. After leaving the presidency in 1877, Grant and his wife Julia embarked on an unprecedented 2.5-year world tour, where he was greeted as a hero and a symbol of a reunited America. But another, final current was waiting for him. In 1884, he was plunged into a new crisis. His son had entered a business partnership with a man named Ferdinand Ward, the young Napoleon of finance. The firm of Grant and Ward was a Ponzi scheme, and when it collapsed, Grant lost his entire fortune, leaving him financially ruined. Almost simultaneously, he received a second fatal blow, a diagnosis of terminal throat cancer. He was in his final battle, facing a foe he could not defeat. For years, friends had urged him to write his memoirs. He had always refused, believing, "It's all in Bordeaux," a reference to a staff officer's history. Now, facing ruin and needing to provide for his family, Grant turned to writing. He began a race against his own failing health. He wrote at a furious pace, sometimes finishing 25 to 50 pages a day. In June 1885, his family moved him to a cottage in Mount McGregor, New York. There, too weak to walk, he sat, propped up in chairs, pen to paper, fighting his final battle. This was his last campaign, an unconditional surrender to his duty. He completed the manuscript for his personal memoirs on July 18, 1885. 5 days later, his mission complete, Ulysses S. Grant died.